Hello and welcome back. Today is December 5th, 2024, and we are reading chapter 29 of Lirael by Garth Nix today. And I am feeling much better today. I listened to my body yesterday, and I rested a little bit after I read and edited. I tried to meditate some. I ended up making a recording, but that's neither here nor there. I still got my super warm sweater on today. I'm feeling a little sweaty, but I've been running around doing stuff, so anyways, we have a pretty long chapter to read today. We're back to Lirael. We've left Sam in the woods, passed out on a pile of leaves after getting stabbed by some officers, so hopefully he's okay. But I'm ready to get into this chapter and see what's going to happen, so let's get started. Chapter 29, The Observatory of the Clayr. The disreputable dog woke with great reluctance, spending a number of minutes in stiff-legged stretching, yawning, and eye-rolling. Finally, she shook herself and headed for the door. Lirael stood where she was, her arms crossed, sternly across her chest. "Dog, I need to talk to you!" The dog acted surprised, putting her ears back with a sudden jerk. "Shouldn't we be hurrying home? It's after midnight, you know. 3rd hour of the morning, in fact." "No!" exclaimed Lirael, all thoughts of talks forgotten. "It can't be! We'd better hurry!" "Still, if you want to have a talk," said the dog, sitting back on her haunches and cocking her head to a prime listening attitude. "There's no time like the present, I always say." Lirael didn't answer. She rushed to the door, pulling on the dog's collar as she passed, yanking her upright. "Ow!" yelped the dog. "I was only joking. I'll hurry." Come on, snapped Lirael, pushing her hands against the door, and then trying to pull at it, which was difficult because it didn't have a handle or a knob. "Oh, how does this open?" "Ask it," replied the dog calmly. "There's no point pushing." Lirael let out a huff of frustration, took a deep breath, and then forced herself to say, "Please open door." The door seemed to think about it for a moment, then slowly swung inwards, giving Lirael enough time to back away. The roar of the river rose through the doorway, and a cool breeze came with it, lifting Lirael's sadly singed hair. The wind also brought something else, something that attracted the dog's attention, though Lirael couldn't tell what it was. Said the dog, turning one ear towards the door and the charter-lit bridge beyond it. "People. Clayr. Possibly even an aunt." "Aunt Kirith!" exclaimed Lirael, jumping nervously. She looked around wildly, seeking another way out, but there was nowhere to go except back across the slippery, river-washed bridge. And now she could see bright charter lights out in the rift, lights made fuzzy by the mist and spray from the river. "What'll we do?" she asked, but her question echoed in the room, taking up the space where there should have been an answer. Quickly, Lirael looked back, but there was no sign of the disreputable dog. She'd simply disappeared. "Dog!" whispered Lirael, eyes scanning the room as tears started to blur her vision. "Dog! Don't leave me now!" The dog had left before when people might have seen her, and every time she did, Lirael harbored the secret fear that her one and only friend would never come back. She felt that familiar fear uncoil in her stomach, adding to the fear she felt from what she'd learned. Fear of the secret knowledge she felt seething and broiling in the book she held under her arm. It was knowledge that she didn't want to have, for it was not of the Clayr. A single tear ran down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. Aunt Kirith wouldn't have the satisfaction of seeing her cry, she decided, tilting her head back to keep further tears at bay. Aunt Kirith always seemed to expect the worst of Lirael, seemed to think that she would commit terrible crimes and never amount to anything. Lirael felt that it was all because she wasn't a proper Clayr, though some part of her mind had to acknowledge that this was the way Aunt Kirith treated anybody who departed from her stupid standards. Lirael kept her head proudly tilted back until she took her first step on the bridge, when she had to look down into the roiling mist and the fast-rushing water. Without the dog's solid, sucker-footed body at her side, she found the bridge much, much scarier. Lirael took one step, faltered, then started to sway. For a moment, she felt she would fall, and in a panic, she crouched down on all fours. The book of remembrance and forgetting shifted as she moved, and it almost fell out of her shirt as well. But Lirael shoved it back in and started to crawl across the narrow bridge. Even crawling took all her concentration, so she didn't look up until she was almost across. She was now also acutely aware that her hair was burnt and her clothes totally soaked by the spray that kept washing over the bridge, and she was barefoot. When she finally did look up, she let out a stifled scream and made a reflexive hop like a frightened rabbit. Only the quick hands of the two closest Clayr saved her from a potentially fatal fall into the swift, cold waters of the Readalong. They were also the people who had given her the shock. The last two people Lirael would expect to see looking for her, Clayr and Lirael. As always, they looked calm, beautiful, and sophisticated. They were in the uniform of the 9-day watch, their long blonde hair elegantly contained in jeweled nests, and their long white dresses sprinkled with tiny golden stars. They also held wands of steel and ivory, proclaiming that they were the joint voice of the watch. Neither of them looked a day older than when Lirael had first met them properly, out on the terrace on her 14th birthday. They were still everything Lirael thought that Clayr should be. Everything she wasn't. There were a whole lot of Clayr behind them as well, more of the highest, including Vancel, the chief librarian, and what looked like more of the 9-day watch. Quickly counting, Lirael realized that it was probably all of the current 9-day watch, 47 of them, lined up behind Clayr and Lirael, white shapes in the darkness of the rift. But the total absence of Aunt Kirith was the worst sign. That meant that whatever she'd done was punishable by something far worse than extra kitchen duties. Lirael couldn't even imagine what sort of punishment required the presence of the entire watch. She'd never even heard of them leaving the observatory. Not altogether. "Stand up, Lirael," said one of the twins. Lirael realized that she was crouching, still supported by the two Clayr. Gingerly, she stood up, trying to avoid meeting their gaze, not to mention all the other blue and green eyes that she was sure were noting just how brown and muddy her own eyes were. Words rose up in her mind, but her throat closed when they tried to pass. She coughed and stuttered, then finally managed to whisper, I didn't mean to come here. It just happened. And I know I missed dinner and the midnight rounds. I'll make it up somehow." She stopped as Clayr and Lirael glanced at each other and laughed, but it was kind, surprised laughter, not the scorn she feared. "We seem to have established a tradition of meeting you in strange places on your birthday," said Lirael, or perhaps it was Clayr, looking down at the book poking out of Lirael's shirt and the silver panpipes glinting from her waistcoat pocket. "You need not worry about the rounds or a missed dinner. You seem to have claimed a birthright of sorts tonight, one that has waited long for your coming. Everything else is of little consequence." "What do you mean by a birthright?" asked Lirael. The sight was the Clayr's birthright, not a trio of strange magical devices. "You know that alone amongst the Clayr, you've never been seen in the visions," the other twin began. "Never a glimpse, at least till now. But an hour ago, we, that is, the 9-day watch, saw that you would be here, and in another place also. None of us even suspected that this bridge existed, nor the room beyond. But it is clear that while the Clayr of today have not seen you in their visions, the Clayr of long ago saw enough to prepare this place and the things you hold. To prepare you, in fact." "Prepare me for what?" asked Lirael, panicked by the sudden attention. "I don't want anything! All I want is to be normal, to have the sight." Clayr, for it was Clayr who had spoken last, looked down at the young woman, seeing the pain in her. Since their first meeting 5 years before, she and her sister had kept a cautious eye on Lirael, and they knew more about her life than their young cousins suspected. She chose her words carefully. Lirael, the sight may yet come to you in time, and be the stronger for the waiting, but for now you've been given other gifts, gifts that I am sure will be sorely needed by the kingdom. And as all of us of the blood are given gifts, we're also laden with the responsibility to use them wisely and well. You have the potential for great power, Lirael, but I fear that you will also face great tests. She paused, staring into the billowing cloud of mist behind Lirael, and her eyes seemed to cloud too, as her voice grew deeper and became less friendly, more impersonal and strange. You will meet many trials on a path that lies unseen, but you will never forget that you are a daughter of the Clayr. You may not see, but you will remember. And in the remembering, you will see the hidden past that holds the secrets of the future. Lirael shivered at the words, for Clayr had spoken with the truth of prophecy, and her eyes were sparkling with a strange, icy light. "What do you mean by great tests?" Lirael asked, when the last faint echo of Clayr's words were lost, drowned in the roar of the river. Clayr shook her head and smiled, the moment of the vision lost. Unable to speak, she looked at her sister, who continued, "When we saw you here this evening, we also saw you somewhere else, somewhere we have labored for many years to see, without success," said Rael. "On the Red Lake, in a boat of woven reeds. The sun was high and bright, so we know it will be in summer. You looked much as you do now, so we know it's in the summer coming that you will be there. There will be a young man with you," continued Clayr, "a sick or wounded man, one we were asked to seek for the king. We do not know exactly where he is now, or how or when he will come to the Red Lake. He is surrounded by powers that cloak our vision, and his future is dark. But we do know that he lies at the center of some great and terrible danger, a danger not just to him, but to all of us, to the kingdom. And he will be there with you, in the reed boat, at the height of summer." "I don't understand," whispered Lirael. "What's that to do with me? I mean, the Red Lake, this man, and everything. I'm just a second assistant librarian. What have I got to do with it?" "We don't know," answered Clayr. "The visions are fragmented, and a dark cloud spreads like spilt ink across the pages of possible futures. All we know is that this man is important, for both good and ill, and we have seen you with him. We think that you must leave the glacier. You must go south and find the reed boat on the Red Lake, and find him." Lirael looked at Clayr's lips, still moving, but she could hear no sound, save for the cry of the river. The sound of the water rushing to be free of the mountain, flowing away, away to some distant and unknown land. "I'm being thrown out," she thought. "I don't have the sight, I've grown too old, and they're throwing me out." "We've also had another vision of the man," Clayr was saying, as Lirael's hearing came back. "Come, we will show you, so you will know him at the proper time, and know something of the danger he's in. But not here. We must go up to the observatory." "The observatory!" exclaimed Lirael. "But I haven't awoken." "I know," said Rael, taking her hand to lead her. "It is difficult for you to gaze upon your heart's desire when you may not possess it. If the danger were any less, or someone else could shoulder the burden, we would not press you so. If the vision were not of this place that resists us, we could probably show you elsewhere too. But now we need the power of the observatory and the full strength of the watch." They walked back along the rift, with Clayr and Rael on either side of the unprotesting Lirael. Lirael briefly felt what the dog had called her sense of the dead, a sort of pressure from all the dead Clayr buried throughout the rift, but she paid it no heed. It was like someone far away calling someone else's name. All she could think of was that they were making her leave. She would be alone again, because the disreputable dog might not come. The dog might not even be able to exist outside the Clayr's glacier, like ascending that couldn't leave its bounds. Halfway back along the rift, towards the door where she'd come in, Lirael was surprised to see that a long bridge of ice had spanned the depths. The Clayr were walking back across it, and then into a deep cave mouth on the other side of the rift. Lirael saw her look and explained, "There are many ways to and from the observatory, when we have need. This bridge will melt when we have all crossed." Lirael nodded dumbly. She'd always wondered where the observatory actually was, and had tried to find it on more than one occasion. She'd had many daydreams of finding her way there, and finding her sight within, but all those daydreams were destroyed now. Across the bridge, the cave mouth led into a rudely dug tunnel that sloped up quite steeply. It was hard going, and Lirael was hot and out of breath when the tunnel finally flattened out. Rael and Clayr stopped then, and Lirael wiped the sweat from her eyes before she looked around. They had left stone behind. Now there was nothing but ice all around, blue ice that reflected the charter lights the Clayr carried. They had come to the heart of the glacier. A gate was carved in the ice, flanked by 2 guards in full mail, holding shields that bore the golden star of the Clayr. Their faces were stern under their open helms. One carried an axe that gleamed with charter marks, the other a sword that shone brighter than the lights, casting 1,000 tiny reflections in the ice. Lirael stared at the guards, for they were clearly Clayr, but no one she knew, which she had thought impossible. There were less than 3,000 Clayr in the glacier, and she had lived here all her life. "I see you, voice of the 9-day watch," said the woman with the axe, speaking in a strange, formal tone. "You may pass, but the other with you has not awoken. By the ancient laws, she must not be allowed to see the secret ways." "Don't be silly, Arameo," said Clayr. "What ancient laws? It's Lirael, Ariel's daughter." "Arameo," whispered Lirael, peering at the severe face, sharply defined by the edges of her helm. Arameo had joined the Rangers 6 years ago, and hadn't been seen since. Lirael had thought Arameo must have been killed in an accident, and that she'd missed her farewell, as she had missed so many other events that required her to don the blue tunic. "The laws are clear," said Arameo, still in the same stern voice, though Lirael saw her gulp nervously. "I am the axe guard. She must be blindfolded if you wish her to pass." Clayr snorted and turned to the other woman. "And what says the sword guard? Don't tell me you agree." "Yes, unfortunately," said the other woman, who Lirael realized was much older. "The letter of the law is strict. Guests must be blindfolded. Anyone who is not awoken Clayr is a guest." Clayr sighed and turned to Lirael, but Lirael had already hung her head to hide her humiliation. Slowly, she undid her headscarf, folded it into a narrow band, and bound it around her head, covering her eyes. Behind the soft darkness of the cloth, she wept silently, the blindfold soaking up her tears. Clayr and Rael took her hands again, and Lirael felt the sympathy in their touch. But it did not matter. This was even worse than when she was 14, standing alone in her blue tunic, suffering the public shame of not being a Clayr. Now she was irrevocably marked as an outsider, not a Clayr at all, of any kind, only a guest. She asked only 2 questions as Rael and Clayr led her through what felt like a complicated, maze-like passage. "When will I have to go?" "Today," said Rael, as she stopped Lirael and prepared her for another sharp turn by gently pushing her elbow till she was facing the right way. "That is to say, as soon as possible. A boat is being prepared for you. It will be spelled to take you down the Readalong to Clayr. From there, you should be able to get some constables, or even some of the guard, to escort you to Edge, on the Red Lake itself. It should be a fast and uneventful journey, though we wish we could see some of it beforehand." "Am I to go alone?" Lirael couldn't see, but she sensed Clayr and Rael exchanging glances, silently working out who would speak. At last, Clayr said, "That is how you have been seen, so I'm afraid that's how you'll have to go. I wish it were otherwise. We would fly you down by paper wing, but all the paper wings have been seen elsewhere, so the river it must be." Alone, without even her one friend, the disreputable dog. It didn't really matter what happened to her now. "There are some steps down here," said Rael, stopping Lirael again. "About 30, I think. Then we will be in the observatory, and you can take the blindfold off." Lirael mechanically went with the twins down the steps. It was unsettling, not being able to see where her feet were going, and some of the steps seemed lower than the others. To make it worse, there was a weird rustling noise all around, and occasionally the hint of whispers or smothered conversations. Finally, they arrived on level ground and took a half-dozen steps forward. Clayr helped untie her blindfold. Light was the first thing Lirael noticed, and space, and then the massed ranks of the Clayr, silently standing in their white, rustling robes. She stood in the center of a huge chamber carved entirely out of ice, a vast cave easily as large as the great hall she knew and hated so much. Charter magic light shone everywhere, reflecting from the many facets of the ice, so that there was not a hint of darkness anywhere. Lirael instinctively looked down when she saw all the other Clayr, so she couldn't meet anyone's eyes. But as she cautiously peered out from behind her protective fall of singed hair, she saw that they were not looking at her. They were all looking up. She followed their gaze and saw that the angled ceiling was perfectly smooth and flat, one single enormous sheet of clear ice, almost like an enormous opaque window. "Yes," said Clayr, noting Lirael's stare. "That is where we focus our sight, so all the fragments of the visions can become one, and everyone can see." "I think we may begin," announced Rael, looking around at the massed, silent ranks of the Clayr. Nearly every awoken Clayr was there, to join a watch of 1568. They stood in a series of even wider circles around the small central area where Lirael, Clayr, and Rael stood, like some strange, concentric orchard of white trees that bore silver and moonstone fruit. "Let us begin!" cried Clayr and Rael, and they lifted their wands and clashed them together like swords. Lirael jumped as all the gathered Clayr shouted back, a great bellow that she felt through her bones. "Let us begin!" As one, the Clayr in the closest circle joined hands, snapping together as in military drill. Then the next circle joined hands, and the next, a wave of movement rippling from the center to the farthest circle in the observatory, till all was still again. "Let us see!" cried Clayr and Rael, clashing their wands together. This time, Lirael was prepared for the shout that came back, but not for the magic that followed. Charter marks seemed to well up out of the icy floor, flowing up through the Clayr of the first circle, till there were so many they brimmed over and flowed into the next circle, and then the one after that. Charter marks that flowed like thick golden fog up the Clayr's bodies and along their arms. Lirael watched the magic grow as it passed each circle, saw it wrap itself around the bodies of her cousins. She could see the charter marks, feel the magic in her pounding heart, hunger for it. But it remained alien, somehow beyond her, as no other charter magic had ever been. Then the outermost circle of the Clayr broke their hand clasps and held their arms up towards the distant icy ceiling. Marks flowed from them into the air, falling upwards like golden dust caught in shafts of sunlight. When it hit the ice, it splashed there, as if it were glorious paint, and the ice a blank canvas, waiting to come alive. Each circle followed in turn, till all the magic they'd summoned had risen to fill the whole huge ice ceiling with swirling charter marks. They stared at it, entranced, and Lirael saw their eyes move as if they all watched something there. But she saw nothing, nothing save the swirl of magic that she couldn't understand. "Look," said Rael softly, and the wand she held suddenly became a bottle of bright green glass. "Learn," said Clayr, and she waved her wand in a pattern directly above Lirael's head. Then Rael threw the contents of the bottle, seemingly at Lirael, but as the liquid flew over her head, Clayr's wand transformed it into ice, a pane of pure, translucent ice that hung horizontally in the air directly above Lirael's head. Clayr tapped this pane with her wand, and it began to glow a deep, comfortable blue. She tapped it again, and the blue fled to the edges, Lirael stared at it, and then through it, and as she stared, she realized that this strange, suspended pain was helping her see what the Clayr saw. The meaningless patterns on the ice ceiling above were starting to become clear. Hundreds, maybe even thousands, of tiny pictures were joining together to make up a larger picture, like the puzzle pictures she'd played with as a child. It was a picture of a man standing with his foot on a rock, Lirael saw now. He was looking at something below him. Curious, Lirael craned her head back for a better view. That made her dizzy for an instant, and then it seemed as if she were falling upwards, through the blue pane, and all the way up into the ceiling, falling into the vision. There was a flash of blue, and a touch of something that made her shiver, and she was there. She was standing next to the man. She could hear his rasping, unhealthy-sounding breath, smell the faintest hint of sweat, feel the heat and humidity of a summer day. And she could taste the awful taint of free magic, stronger and more vile than she could have ever imagined, stronger even than her memory of the Stilken, so strong that the bile rose in her throat, and she had to force it back, and dots danced before her eyes. And that's the end of chapter 29, so that was good. I'll post chapter 30 tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are going back to Nicholas now, it says, so sneak peek. I hope you enjoyed that reading. I enjoyed reading it. Poor Lirael. I feel so bad for her. I remember feeling bits of that when I was a kid, and oh, I'm so glad I'm an adult now. I don't feel like that anymore. But anyways, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. I'm gonna go make some chili, and I'll see you tomorrow night. So take care, stay warm, it's cold outside, and as always, may your magic manifest. Bye.